The White House promo after the Donald J. Trump comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict was announced. But people don't make peace deals as much as start peace processes, and Donald Trump didn't write a book called The Art of the Process. Yesterday billed it as part of a bigger picture.
Let's call it eternal peace in the Middle East.
The ball is now in Hamas's court, so first up, what's the deadline for their response?
How long do you plan to give Hamas to respond to the ceasefire proposal you've laid?
Well, we're going to do about 3 or 4 days. We'll see how it is. All of the Arab countries are signed up. The Muslim countries all signed up. Israel's all signed up. We're just waiting for Hamas, and Hamas is either going to be doing it or not, and if it's not, it's going to be a very sad end.
As the last person in the room with Trump before the press conference yesterday, Netanyahu insisting today that he'd got Hamas where he wanted them.
Instead of Hamas isolating us, we turned things around and isolated Hamas. Now the whole world, including the Arab and Muslim world, is pressurizing Hamas to accept the conditions we set together with President Trump.
If Hamas do eventually buy in, the real work begins, and every point in this 20-point plan, a world of potentially fraught diplomacy. To the detail then. Hamas to hand over all of the 20 living hostages at once, as well as the bodies of the deceased. Once that happens, Israel release several hundred Palestinian prisoners serving life sentences and over 1,000 Gazans detained since the start of the war. This could be the first stumbling block. It would mean that Hamas's twisted leverage in the process disappears from the very start. Also, Hamas recently said they'd lost contact with 2 of the hostages inside Gaza as a result of Israeli bombardment, which could complicate the exchange. The cousin of deceased hostage Tal Jaime, whose body is still being held inside Gaza, responding to the plan today.
We know that every day that passes, the chaos in Gaza may cause us to lose the murdered hostages forever. We need this war to end with every single hostage back home.
Another pillar of the plan, the withdrawal of IDF troops, but to where and by when. It envisages a phased withdrawal, but little by way of timelines. The exception is the first move back in advance of the hostage release to come within 72 hours of the initial agreement. Israel would still control the majority of the territory at this point. The second withdrawal would happen when an international stabilization force of Arab Muslim countries would be in place, with the capacity to ensure Hamas are disarmed. At this point, Israel still control more than a third of Gaza. And then the final withdrawal to what's termed a security buffer zone would be based on, quote, standards, milestones and timeframes linked to demilitarization. Inside Gaza this morning, people waking up to news of more deaths, as well as would-be deals.
All night, my children asked me, will we wake up to a ceasefire in the morning? We woke up to find my cousin martyred, along with his children and his wife, who was 7 months pregnant. We didn't wake up to a truce, but to more calamity.
Another part of the plan relates to disarmament and amnesty. Once hostages are returned, Hamas members who, quote, commit to peaceful coexistence would be granted amnesty, and those who wish to leave granted safe passage. That would be predicated on Hamas members having to decommission their weapons, along with all military infrastructure, tunnels and weapon production destroyed. In other words, the end of Hamas as a viable fighting entity. Finally, what does the plan say about who would govern the Strip, and beyond that, the establishment of a Palestinian state? This brings us back to the man with the plan, his name and Nobel Prize application all over it. Donald Trump would chair the Board of Peace. Other members to include Tony Blair, a man who knows a thing or two about both peace processes and disastrous military campaigns. The board would oversee a new technocratic transitional authority on the Strip. The plan leaves the door open to an eventual Palestinian state, but only if the Palestinian Authority carries out sweeping reforms, something Benjamin Netanyahu is dead against. There is an enormous amount riding on this deal, the lives of thousands of Gazans and the Israeli hostages. There's a problem, though, at its heart. If it succeeds, Hamas get prisoners back but relinquish power here. Netanyahu gets hostages back but faces elections next year with a fractious coalition. So to a greater or lesser extent, both parties to the deal would be committing to their own demise.
As well as war and peace hang in the balance in the Middle East, Donald Trump and his Secretary of War, as he's now called, Pete Hegseth, have summoned hundreds of top brass urgently back to a military headquarters near Washington for a war on body fat, amongst other things. America's editor, Anushka Stana, is in Washington. Anushka, we'll talk about the fat in a minute, but what about the 20-point plan? How's he been trying to sell that?
Well, look, I think here in the US, people are really trying to dissect that plan to understand whether it really does represent any hope of progress. The truth is, it's already getting quite complicated. Questions being asked about whether things are quite as they seem. Take Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, he stood up in the White House. He agreed to the plan, which had point 19, credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination. He took no questions and then since then has done a video message saying in no way would this pave the way towards Palestinian statehood. And there are also questions on the other side as well, a suggestion that some of the Arab countries involved in this are angry that the final plan was different than that they were briefed. There's been some interesting behind-the-scenes reporting here by Axios about a 6-hour meeting between Netanyahu and Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy, as well as Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, on Sunday, in which he asked for edits, including around the timetable for Israel's withdrawal from Gaza. A suggestion in Axios that officials from across the Middle East are furious about those changes. Meanwhile, as you say, Donald Trump ordered hundreds of generals to come back to the US for a meeting in Virginia. There was huge build-up. Many of them came from the Middle East, but they weren't talking about Israel and Gaza. As you say, we had the slightly bizarre spectacle of the now called Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, talking about fat generals, telling the military leadership that they had to deal with their body weight and that they should be doing more personal training. And then Donald Trump stood up. It was a long, rambling speech, but he wasn't talking about foreign wars. He was talking about war here in America. Have a listen to what he said.
But it seems that the ones that are run by the radical left Democrats, what they've done to San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, they're very unsafe places. And we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war, too. It's a war from within. And I told Pete, we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military. Because we're going into Chicago very soon. That's a big city.
So look, that's here, but in terms of the peace plan, I think what you really need to know is what do people in Palestine think about this? And there was some really interesting Gallup polling out very recently that suggested this. Palestinians are very, very disapproving of both US and UK leadership, including when Tony Blair was in charge. So will they accept Donald Trump and Tony Blair as a leadership body?
Joining me now from Tel Aviv is the Israeli former Brigadier General Amir Avivi. Thank you very much for coming back on the programme. So there's a bit of confusion about this plan. I'm sure you've looked at it in detail. What, as far as you're concerned, does this plan involve a pathway to a Palestinian state, yes or no?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't, and it's not the purpose of the plan. The plan is not about a Palestinian state. The plan is about bringing back the hostages. It's about demilitarizing the Gaza Strip. It's about Hamas laying down their weapons and getting out of Gaza. It's about a new kind of governance in Gaza based on the local Gazans, on the local clans. By the way, already in 80% of the Gaza Strip, there are local clans managing different areas of Gaza Strip, working together with Israel.
Okay, so there is a quote here, though, from the plan. Conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to a Palestinian self-determination and statehood. So that would contradict what you just told me.
Well, we're talking, you know, when the issue is that when people say two-state solution, they look at a very specific kind of two-state solution, which Israel won't agree to. Israel is not going to retreat from the Jordan Valley or the mountains of Judah and Samaria. But I think that most Israelis agree that We want self-governance for the Palestinians because Israel has no intention annexing millions of Palestinians to the state of Israel. So obviously they need self-governance. The question is what kind of self-governance? And this is very flexible. There are very different kinds of solutions, which will be discussed probably later on. But if you ask me what really this deal is about, it's about two things. One, the day after in Gaza specifically, and regional global peace agreements. This is an event very, very similar to what we saw in February 1945, the Yalta Conference, when USSR, the US, and Britain, knowing that the Nazis are going to be defeated in a few months, sat and discussed two things. What is Germany the day after, and the world the day after. Exactly the same is happening now. What is Gaza the day after, and global regional peace agreements.
Right, but you're not going to get you're not going to get a regional peace agreement unless the Palestinians are on side, because the Gulf states and the Saudis would never accept that.
So I disagree, and I can assure you that in the coming year there will be peace agreements, as we did already the Abraham Accords. It's going to be an expansion of the Abraham Accords and demilitarization and rebuild of Gaza. But there won't be a Palestinian state.
There won't be a Palestinian state. You said it clearly, the Prime Minister said it. There are many others who beg to differ, of course, including the government of this country, who's just recognized the Palestinian state. Just on the question of Israeli troops, again...
And how are the British people reacting to that? I see the polls in Britain.
Okay, but that's another issue.
I didn't see the British people really enjoying this decision.
The British people are absolutely fine with this decision. Just briefly, on Israeli troops inside Gaza...
Not according to your polls.
Hang on, that's not true. On Gaza and Israeli troops, will they stay in Gaza or will they be withdrawn?
Well, according to the plan, they will stay in Gaza. They will retreat in 2 stages. The retreat is dependent on the militarization, on making sure that all the weapons, the tunnels, everything is dismantled. And when this happens, they will retreat to a line that will enable Israel to sustain a perimeter to control Philadelphia corridor and part of the northern part of the Gaza Strip in order to prevent the kind of attack that our towns experienced on this terrible day of the 7th of October, where 1,200 people were massacred by Hamas.
Okay, just in literally one word, do you think the Israeli cabinet, Mr. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, will accept this plan, yes or no?
Yes, they will accept it. Okay. They wanted also to have sovereignty over parts in Jordan Valley and Judean Samaria. It's not relevant at the moment because the focus is on regional peace agreements.
Well, joining me now is Yezid Saig, a fellow at the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut and a former advisor and negotiator for the Palestinian delegation for peace talks with Israel. Thank you for coming to the studio.
Thank you.
You heard what the Brigadier General had to say there. No Palestinian state. Israeli troops will stay in Gaza. There'll be some kind of self-determination of yet to be defined. Will Hamas agree to any of this? Will the Palestinians agree to any of this?
I think that Palestinians will not agree to what your Israeli guest just said and laid out, of having no hope of self-determination as they determine it, not as Israel determines it. It's not for Israel to decide what kind of statehood the Palestinians should have. It's for Palestinians.
But that's what they think they're doing.
I'm sure. And of course, this is partly why I think that although there are some very good elements in the Trump 20-point peace plan, that I think its prospects are poor.
Right. Why?
Well, moving away from Palestinian statehood. So there are 2 sort of key aspects to this plan. One is that there are various issues of principle, aspiration, and so on, such as a long-term peace involving Palestinian statehood with the approval of regional partners and therefore full normalization with Israel. But that's all aspirational down the line. And as we just heard from your previous guest, something that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has already said that Israel will forcibly prevent. Now, the other side of this agreement, of course, is the immediate one. It's the ceasefire, the return of all Israeli hostages, whether living or dead, to Israel within 72 hours, the disarming of Hamas, the laying down of weapons, and the immediate resumption of full aid flows into Gaza, to be followed,
Which is vital.
Which is vital. So these are the sort of very positive aspects. The problem is, how long will the ceasefire hold beyond that?
But isn't it it's sort of, in very simplistic terms, the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict since the beginning, since 1948, is something is put on the table, the Palestinians don't like it because it's not enough, and then something worse happens down the line. Is there an argument for the Palestinians to embrace this and say, this is not perfect, it's not even maybe good, but it's better than the current reality, and at least they're not trying to annex the West Bank or annex the Gaza Strip and set up new settlements, and we'll take it from there?
Yeah. I think the Palestinians have, in fact, endorsed a meaningful, reasonable two-state solution, in the past quarter of a century.
So, no, you're right. After the Oslo Agreement, yes.
As part of let's just to keep the folks right here and now on this plan. Were the plan to be implemented in full, then I think that whatever reservations one might have, it's a good thing. My concern is that there are key flaws, key things that are missing. Firstly, is the issue of the plan says that the United States will work with Arab partners to deploy an international peacekeeping force in Gaza to take over from the withdrawing Israeli forces immediately. We have no idea who's going to put boots on the ground in Gaza, for instance. Who will actually monitor this process? And unless President Trump stays on this day and night, then there's every likelihood that this ceasefire will end up very similar to what Israel does in Lebanon, which is to strike Hezbollah targets daily.
Just briefly, are you happy about Tony Blair coming back to the Middle East?
Oh, I think it's a ghastly choice.
Ghastly choice?
Yes. Look, I've followed, in the roughly 18 years since he became the special envoy of the Quartet, the US, UN, EU, and Russia group that was meant to steer towards Israel-Palestine peace, I've interacted a lot with his staff. I'm not aware of one meaningful, durable achievement he's achieved on the ground for Palestinians. So
you're not a fan then?
I don't think this is a merit-based appointment. Let's put it that way.